That evening began in the most ordinary way, yet it carried a strange pull that I could not ignore. My father's friend had always been around, someone the family trusted deeply, a man whose presence at our gatherings never raised suspicion. He was polite, generous, and often treated me like his own child. When he invited me over to his house, I didn't think twice about it. He mentioned that he wanted to talk about something important, something he preferred to discuss privately, away from the noise of others. His tone carried a seriousness that made me curious, and so I agreed without hesitation. When I arrived, his house felt quieter than I remembered. The air was calm, almost too calm, and the silence of the rooms made my footsteps sound louder than they should have. He greeted me warmly, like always, but his eyes lingered just a little longer than usual. He led me through the hallway, past the familiar living room where I had often sat with my father, and toward a door I had never entered before. It opened into a separate room that seemed carefully arranged, almost untouched, as though he had been waiting for me. The room itself had an atmosphere that unsettled me. The curtains were drawn halfway, allowing just enough light to filter and to cast shadows on the walls. A faint scent of cologne hung in the air, mixed with the smell of old wood and fabric. He closed the door behind us, and that simple sound sent a shiver down my spine. Suddenly, the thought crossed my mind. Why had he brought me here, away from everyone else? My heart began to beat faster, though I tried to steady myself, reminding myself that he was family, a man I trusted. He asked me to sit, his voice calm and low, as though he didn't want the rest of the world to hear what was about to be said. I lowered myself onto the sofa, my hands folded tightly in my lap. He sat across from me, his gaze steady, but there was something unspoken in his expression that I couldn't quite read. I felt as though he was studying me, measuring each reaction, waiting for the right moment to reveal what was on his mind. He began with small talk, asking about my studies, my daily routine, my father's health. It felt normal enough, yet beneath the ordinary words was a weight I couldn't ignore. Each question seemed to carry a deeper meaning, though he never said it outright. I found myself answering quickly, nervously, wondering if I was imagining the tension in the air. There was a moment when the silence stretched longer than it should have. I shifted uncomfortably, glancing around the room as if searching for something to distract me. My eyes landed on the neatly arranged bookshelves, the framed photographs on the wall, the careful order of everything. It was a room meant for comfort, yet it felt like a stage where something hidden was about to unfold. As he leaned forward slightly, closing the distance between us, I felt a mix of emotions: curiosity, unease, and something else I didn't want to name. I told myself that I should relax, that nothing was out of place, but deep down I knew this meeting wasn't as simple as it had first appeared. My thoughts began to swirl with questions I couldn't ask, and my pulse quickened with an anticipation I didn't want to admit. The room seemed to grow smaller with every passing second, the silence pressing down on me. I could hear the sound of my own breathing, faster than it should have been, and the faint ticking of a clock somewhere in the house. He finally spoke again, his tone softer this time, as though he wanted me to listen more carefully. His words were vague, carefully chosen, but they carried a weight that told me we had crossed into a conversation that wasn't meant for anyone else to hear. That I sat there, torn between the comfort of familiarity and the edge of something I couldn't yet understand. In that quiet, private room, the world outside seemed to disappear, leaving only the two of us, bound by a silence filled with questions that neither of us dared to answer aloud. The air in the room seemed heavier the longer I sat there, as though the walls themselves were listening. His gaze didn't leave me, steady and deliberate, and it made my hands fidget restlessly in my lap. I tried to remind myself that this was my father's friend, someone who had always carried himself with dignity. Yet here, in the quiet of this closed room, everything felt different. He leaned back slowly, crossing his arms, and began to speak again, his tone casual on the surface, but carrying something more underneath. He told me stories about my father, about the old days when they were young and reckless, about promises they had made to each other as friends. I listened politely, even smiled at moments, but my mind was elsewhere. I was distracted by the way his voice dropped lower at certain words, how his eyes seemed to search my face, as if he were waiting for a sign of understanding that went beyond the words themselves. I found myself unable to hold his gaze for long. Each time our eyes met, I felt exposed, as though he could read every thought I was trying to hide. My heart beat faster, and I hated how aware I had become of every small gesture: his hands resting on the armrest, the slight tilt of his head, the way his words slowed when he spoke directly to me. It was no longer just a conversation. There was something unspoken building between us, and I didn't know how to stop it. That a part of me wanted to leave, to break the silence and walk out before anything happened that I might regret. But another part of me, quieter and more dangerous, told me to stay. That part of me was curious. Curious about why he had asked me here, curious about what he truly wanted to say, and curious about the unfamiliar stirrings in my chest that refused to be ignored. He shifted forward slightly, resting his elbows on his knees, and the distance between us felt smaller, as though the air itself was pulling us closer. He asked me about my own life, not just the surface details, but deeper questions: what I wanted for myself, what I dreamed about, what kept me awake at night. It startled me, because no one asked me those things, not even my own family. His voice was gentle, but his words touched places in me that I kept hidden from everyone else. That I hesitated before answering, fumbling for words that would not reveal too much. But as I spoke, I felt myself unraveling little by little, sharing thoughts I had never spoken aloud. He listened intently, nodding, encouraging, as though every word mattered. The attention was disarming. It made me feel seen in a way I hadn't experienced before, and yet, beneath that comfort was a growing sense of danger. I was keenly aware of how wrong this felt, how fragile the trust between him and my father truly was. But emotions don't always follow reason. The more I spoke, the more I noticed how his eyes softened, how his posture relaxed, as though he had found a connection he had been searching for. Silence fell again, heavier this time, and I could feel the weight of it pressing down on me. My thoughts tangled in a mess of guilt, curiosity, and a strange longing that frightened me. I couldn't decide whether I wanted to escape or to surrender to the moment. Every second stretched longer, every breath seemed louder, and I felt myself trapped between two choices. One safe, the other forbidden. He finally leaned back again, his expression unreadable, and for a fleeting moment I wondered if I had imagined everything. But then his eyes lingered a second too long. His voice softened just enough, and the truth settled in me like a heavy stone. The boundaries that had once felt so strong were beginning to blur. That I told myself that nothing had happened yet, that perhaps I was overthinking, but deep inside I knew the line between respect and desire had already been crossed. What unsettled me the most was not his behavior, but my own reaction, the way a part of me wanted to keep listening, to keep sitting there in that closed room, even though I knew I should have walked away. The silence between us was unbearable, yet neither of us moved away. I could hear the faint ticking of the clock in the next room, the hum of the ceiling fan above us, and beneath it all, the thundering rhythm of my own heartbeat. His presence was overwhelming, not because he said or did anything, but because of the way he simply existed in that moment, filling the space with a quiet intensity one could no longer ignore. That I should have asked him to leave. That was the sensible choice, the safe choice. But my body betrayed my mind. My hand trembled as I reached for the back of the chair near me, pretending to steady myself, when in truth, I was trying to resist the urge to reach for him instead. My breath came unevenly, and when his eyes finally met mine, something in me broke. That I took a small step forward. He didn't move, didn't lean in or retreat, only watched me with a kind of restraint that made my desire burn hotter. I whispered his name softly, barely audible, but it felt like a confession. He lowered his gaze again, as if reminding himself of who he was, of where he stood. But when I touched his arm, the air between us shattered. The warmth of his skin beneath my fingertips sent a jolt through me. It was such a simple thing, but it carried more weight than I could bear. My loneliness, my longing, the endless nights of silence, all of it seemed to pour into that touch. He inhaled sharply, as though my hand had lifted a dam inside him. And for a moment, we stood frozen, bound by something neither of us had intended. That I leaned closer, so close that I could feel the roughness of his breath, the faint scent of dust and earth clinging to him. My mind screamed at me to stop, to remember my vows, to think of the consequences, but my heart refused. I had been empty for so long, aching for a warmth that my husband no longer gave me. And in that moment, I no longer cared about right or wrong. When his hand finally rose, hesitantly, to rest against mine, I felt a wave of release sweep through me. It was gentle, almost reluctant, as if he feared breaking me. My chest tightened with both guilt and relief, but I didn't pull away. Instead, I let the closeness consume me. I leaned into him, letting the space between us collapse, and when our lips finally met, it was not wild or hurried, but soft, tender, filled with all the words we dared not speak. Time seemed to blur after that. The walls of the house, the rules I had lived by, the world beyond those doors, all of it faded. There was only us, tangled in a forbidden embrace, a storm of passion and desperation that I had never thought myself capable of. Every touch carried weight, every glance a dangerous promise. I felt alive, burning, trembling under the intensity of it, even as guilt laced itself around my heart. When it was over, silence fell again, heavier than before. I lay still, my chest rising and falling too quickly, while he sat at the edge of the bed, his shoulders tense, his hands clenched in his lap. The reality of what we had done settled in like a shadow creeping across the room. My breath slowed, but my mind raced with fear and disbelief. He turned his head slightly, his expression unreadable, and for a moment I wondered if he regretted it already. I wanted to speak, to reassure him, to reassure myself, but no words came. The guilt pressed down on me like a weight I couldn't shake. My heart was split in two, half of it still trembling with the warmth of what had just happened, the other half already drowning in shame. Finally, he rose. His movements were slow, hesitant, as though he feared looking at me again might undo whatever resolve he was clinging to. I sat up, clutching the sheet to my chest, my eyes following him helplessly. He didn't need to say it. Both of us knew this was something that could never happen again. The door. He paused. For a moment, I thought he would turn back, that he would look at me one last time, but he didn't. He stepped out quietly, his figure fading into the dim light of the hallway, leaving behind nothing but the echo of what we had shared. I sat alone, my body trembling, my mind caught between the thrill of passion and the terror of betrayal. Outside, the world continued as if nothing had happened, but inside, everything had changed. I pressed my face into my hands, trying to steady myself, knowing that I had crossed a line that could never be erased. And as the hours crept by, I kept hearing the same thought over and over again in my head. My husband would be home soon.